Sheriff Wade Harrison dropped his morning coffee, the ceramic mug shattering against the station floor as 1,800 pounds of black and reddish-brown fury exploded through the glass doors. Thunder, the Brahman bull everyone in Millbrook knew by reputation, stood heaving in the doorway, his massive frame trembling with exhaustion and something deeper, desperation. Strapped to his broad back with torn bed sheets was 9-year-old Lucy Bennett, unconscious, her pale face streaked with dirt and what looked like blood. Deputy Martinez stumbled backward, his chair clattering to the floor. "Jesus Christ, Wade, is that—" "That's Thomas Bennett's daughter," Harrison whispered, his hand instinctively moving to his service weapon before stopping. Thunder's amber eyes, wild yet strangely focused, locked onto Lucy's still form. The bull's massive head lowered protectively, a low rumble emanating from his chest. Not a threat, but a plea. Harrison's radio crackled with emergency chatter, but his mind raced with impossible questions. How had a bull traveled 15 miles from the Bennett ranch? Why was Lucy unconscious on his back? And what kind of hell had driven them both here? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 years ago, Thomas Bennett had everything a man could want in rural Texas. His ranch stretched across 200 acres of prime grazing land. His wife Rebecca's laughter filled their farmhouse kitchen every morning, and their daughter Lucy, despite her heart condition, brought joy that made every medical bill worth paying. Back then, Thunder was just another bull in the pasture, a massive Brahman with scars from his fighting days, rescued by Rebecca from an illegal ring in Houston. "That bull's got a soul, Thomas," Rebecca used to say, watching Thunder gently lower his enormous head so 7-year-old Lucy could pet his nose through the fence. "Look at those eyes. He understands more than we give him credit for." Thomas thought his wife was being sentimental. Bulls were livestock, valuable for breeding and beef. But Rebecca saw something different in Thunder's amber gaze, something almost human in the way he responded to Lucy's wheelchair, carefully stepping around her oxygen tank, positioning his massive body as a windbreak when she sat outside during her breathing treatments. Everything changed on a rain-soaked Tuesday night in October. Rebecca's car went off County Road 47, rolled 3 times, and ended up in Miller's Creek. The sheriff called it hydroplaning. Thomas called it the end of his world. Lucy, who'd been sleeping when the phone rang, woke to find her father sobbing at the kitchen table and her mother never coming home again. The medical bills piled up like autumn leaves. Lucy's hypoplastic left heart syndrome required constant monitoring, expensive medications, and regular trips to Houston's Children's Hospital. Without Rebecca's income from her job at the county clerk's office, Thomas struggled to keep the ranch afloat. The bank notices started arriving in pink envelopes, warnings, then threats, then deadlines. "Daddy, why does Thunder look so sad?" Lucy asked one morning, 6 months after Rebecca's funeral. Thomas glanced at the pasture where the massive bull stood alone, his head hanging low. Since Rebecca's death, Thunder had changed. He no longer grazed with the other cattle, instead spending his days near the house, as if waiting for someone who would never return. "Animals grieve too, sweetheart," Thomas said, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. Now, 18 months later, Thomas faced the impossible. Lucy needed a heart transplant. $500,000 the insurance company refused to cover. The ranch was 3 payments behind on the mortgage, and Victor Castellanos had called again about Thunder, offering $25,000 cash for the fighting circuit. "That bull's still got fight in him," Castellanos had said over the phone. "My clients pay good money for a champion bloodline." Thomas knew what happened to bulls in those underground rings. They fought until they died or were too broken to continue. But $25,000 would buy Lucy time, maybe even the surgery she needed. Margaret Sullivan, their 78-year-old neighbor and former Army nurse, had other ideas. Thomas Bennett, if you sell that bull, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. That animal loves your daughter more than his own freedom." Thomas wished he could afford the luxury of sentiment. The call came at 5:47 a.m. on a humid Thursday morning in July. Thomas jolted awake to Lucy's heart monitor screaming from the next room, its red alarm lights painting the hallway walls like a crime scene. He found his daughter unconscious in her bed, her lips tinged blue, her small chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths. "Lucy, baby, wake up!" Thomas gathered her limp form, her head lolling against his shoulder as he carried her to the truck. Through the bedroom window, he could see Thunder in the pasture, the massive bull's head raised, amber eyes fixed on the house as if sensing the crisis unfolding inside. Dr. Marcus Webb met them at Millbrook General's emergency entrance, his silver hair disheveled, his usually pristine white coat wrinkled from sleeping in his office. At 48, Webb was the only pediatric cardiologist within 100 miles, a man who'd moved to rural Texas 5 years ago claiming he wanted to help underserved communities. His reputation was spotless, his dedication seemingly endless. "Her heart's failing faster than we anticipated," Webb said after examining Lucy's test results. His voice carried the weight of experience, but Thomas caught something else in his tone, something that felt rehearsed. "The medications aren't working anymore. She needs a transplant within 72 hours, or—" Thomas didn't need him to finish. He'd heard this speech before, seen other families get the same devastating news, but this time it was his daughter on the gurney, her face pale as cotton sheets. "How much?" Thomas asked, though he already knew the answer would destroy him. "The surgery itself is around $500,000, post-operative care, anti-rejection medications, follow-up treatments. You're looking at close to $1 million over the next 5 years." Thomas felt the world tilt beneath his boots. $1 million. He didn't have $1,000 in his checking account. The ranch, if he could sell it, might bring $200,000 after paying off the mortgage. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. That evening, while Lucy slept under heavy sedation, Thomas sat in the hospital cafeteria staring at his phone. Castellanos' business card lay on the formica table between cold coffee and untouched vending machine sandwiches. The man answered on the first ring. "Bennett, I was wondering when you'd call." "$25,000, Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Cash. Tonight." "Smart man. My boys will pick up the bull at midnight. Have him ready." Thomas ended the call and immediately dialed Margaret Sullivan. The old woman had been like a grandmother to Lucy since Rebecca's death, bringing casseroles and homemade cookies, sitting with Lucy during her worst episodes so Thomas could handle ranch work. "Margaret, I need a favor. Can you stay with Lucy tonight? I have to handle some business." Margaret's silence stretched long enough that Thomas wondered if the call had dropped. Finally she spoke, her voice sharp with disapproval. "You're selling Thunder." It wasn't a question. Margaret had lived in Millbrook for 60 years. She knew the sound of desperation, could smell it like smoke on the wind. "I don't have a choice." "There's always a choice, Thomas. That bull isn't just livestock to Lucy. He's family. Family doesn't pay for heart surgery." Margaret's sigh carried 40 years of nursing experience, of watching families torn apart by impossible decisions. "I'll stay with her. But you listen to me, boy. Some things are worth more than money. That bull saved your daughter's life more times than you know." Thomas wanted to ask what she meant, but the line went dead. At 11:30 p.m., Thomas walked to the pasture behind his house. Thunder stood alone under the oak tree where Rebecca used to read to Lucy on summer afternoons. The bull's massive head turned as Thomas approached, those amber eyes reflecting the farmhouse lights like twin flames. "I'm sorry, old boy," Thomas whispered, slipping the lead rope around Thunder's thick neck. "Lucy needs that surgery. You understand, don't you?" Thunder didn't resist as Thomas led him toward the loading chute, but as the 18-wheeler rumbled up the gravel drive, its headlights cutting through the darkness, the bull stopped. His enormous head swung toward the house, nostrils flaring. A low, mournful sound escaped his throat. Not quite a bellow, not quite a whimper. It was the sound of heartbreak given voice. Castellano's men worked efficiently, prodding Thunder up the ramp with electric cattle prods when he hesitated. The bull looked back once as the trailer doors slammed shut, his eyes finding Thomas in the darkness. There was no accusation in that gaze, only a deep, abiding sadness that would haunt Thomas for the rest of his life. As the truck disappeared down County Road 47, Thomas stood alone in his driveway, $25,000 in cash weighing heavy in his jacket pocket. It felt like 30 pieces of silver. He had no idea that Lucy had been awake during the entire transaction, watching from her hospital window as her best friend was driven away into the night. The warehouse sat like a concrete scar on the outskirts of Houston, its windows painted black to hide the blood sport within. Thunder's hooves clattered against the metal trailer floor as Castellano's men unloaded him into a maze of steel pens and rusted gates. The air reeked of fear, sweat, and death, scents that triggered memories Thunder had tried to forget from his fighting days years ago. "Welcome back to hell, champion," sneered Rico, Castellanos' lead handler, jabbing Thunder with an electric prod. The bull's massive frame shuddered, but his eyes remained fixed on something beyond the warehouse walls, as if he could see through concrete and steel to a hospital room 100 miles away where a little girl lay dying. In the main arena, a crowd of wealthy spectators gathered around the fighting pit, their expensive suits and jewelry a stark contrast to the barbaric entertainment they'd paid to witness. Illegal bullfighting had moved underground in Texas, but the money hadn't disappeared. It had simply found darker venues and more desperate participants. Castellanos, a thin man with silver teeth and dead eyes, addressed his clients from a raised platform. Tonight's main event features El Diablo, undefeated in 18 matches, against a returning legend, Thunder, the bull that once killed 2 men in a single fight. The lie rolled off his tongue easily. Thunder had never killed anyone, but legend sold tickets, and truth was a luxury Castellanos couldn't afford in his business. Meanwhile, 48 hours into Lucy's countdown, Dr. Marcus Webb made his rounds at Millbrook General with the practiced efficiency of a man carrying heavy secrets. He stopped at Lucy's room, where Margaret Sullivan sat knitting in the corner chair, her sharp eyes tracking his every movement. "Any word on organ availability?" Thomas asked, hope and desperation warring in his voice. Webb shook his head, but Margaret caught something in his expression, a flicker of calculation that seemed wrong for a man discussing a child's life. "These things take time. Her type is relatively rare. But we're monitoring the situation closely." After Webb left, Margaret pulled her chair closer to Lucy's bed. The child had been unusually quiet since waking up to find Thunder gone, her usual chatter replaced by a hollow silence that worried Margaret more than any medical equipment could. "You know where he went, don't you, sweetheart?" Margaret asked gently. Lucy's eyes, so much like her mother's, filled with tears. "Daddy sold him to pay for my surgery, but Thunder doesn't understand. He thinks we abandoned him." Margaret felt her heart crack. She'd seen enough tragedy in her 78 years to recognize when the universe was testing a family's faith. "That bull knows you love him, Lucy. Animals understand love better than most people." Back in Houston, Thunder stood in the holding pen as handlers tried to pump him full of steroids and stimulants to increase his aggression. But every injection, every prod, every shouted command only seemed to make him more withdrawn. His massive head hung low, and he refused the food they offered. "What's wrong with this bull?" Rico demanded. "He's supposed to be a killer." An older handler, a Mexican man named Carlos who'd worked the underground circuit for 20 years, shook his head. "He's grieving, you idiot. Look at his eyes. This bull had a family, and someone took him away from it." Rico spat into the sawdust. "Bulls don't grieve. They fight or they die." Carlos had seen enough broken animals to know better. This one's different. Mark my words. He won't fight tonight. He's lost his reason to live. At 9 p.m., they dragged Thunder into the arena where El Diablo waited, a massive black bull with scarred flanks and murder in his eyes. The crowd roared as the bulls faced each other across the blood-stained sand, money changing hands as bets were placed on which animal would die first. But Thunder didn't charge. Instead, he stood motionless in the center of the ring, his amber eyes scanning the crowd as if searching for a familiar face that would never be there. El Diablo, confused by his opponent's passivity, pawed the ground and snorted challenges that went unanswered. "Fight, damn you!" Castellano screamed from the platform, but Thunder remained still as a statue. The crowd grew restless. They'd paid for blood, for spectacle, for the primal thrill of watching death delivered by horn and hoof. Instead, they got a bull that seemed more interested in mourning than murder. That's when Rico made his fatal mistake. He climbed into the ring with an electric cattle prod cranked to maximum voltage, intent on forcing Thunder into violence. The first shock hit Thunder's flank, sending 50,000 volts through his massive frame. The bull staggered but didn't move. The second shock hit his shoulder. Thunder's eyes flickered with something that wasn't quite anger. It was recognition. The third shock triggered memories Thunder had buried deep. Rebecca Bennett's scream on a rainy night 2 years ago. The smell of Dr. Webb's cologne in the ranch house. The sound of Lucy's heart monitor flattering. Suddenly, Thunder understood that this wasn't about fighting. It was about getting back to Lucy before it was too late. With a roar that silenced the arena, Thunder spun toward Rico. The handler tried to run, but 1,800 pounds of determined bull moved faster than human reflexes could follow. Thunder's massive shoulder sent Rico flying into the steel barrier with a sickening crack. The man hit the ground and didn't get up. Panic erupted in the arena. Spectators scrambled for exits as Thunder turned his attention to the barriers themselves. With methodical precision, he began ramming the steel gates, his massive frame creating dents that deepened with each impact. Metal screamed against metal as Thunder used his weight and momentum to bend the supposedly unbreakable barriers. "Tranquilize him!" Castellano shouted over the chaos. 3 dart guns fired simultaneously, but Thunder's size and adrenaline made him resistant to the sedatives. He kept ramming the gate, kept bending the steel, kept fighting his way toward freedom with the single-minded determination of a father protecting his child. Finally, the gate gave way. Thunder burst through the twisted metal and charged through the warehouse, scattering handlers and spectators alike. Emergency sirens wailed in the distance as someone finally called the police, but Thunder was already gone, disappeared into the Houston night with one destination burning in his mind. He had to get home. He had to get to Lucy. Behind him, the warehouse burned as overturned lanterns set fire to hay bales and wooden platforms. Castellanos watched his empire collapse in flames and smoke, but all he could think about was the impossible. A bull that had chosen love over violence, freedom over captivity. Carlos, nursing a broken arm, watched Thunder's silhouette disappear into the darkness. "Told you he was different," he muttered to no one in particular. "That bull's got something to live for." What Carlos didn't know was that Thunder had already begun the longest, most dangerous journey of his life, a 100-mile trek across Texas back roads and farmland, following a scent trail only he could detect. The smell of a little girl who needed him more than she needed her next heartbeat. Thunder's hooves pounded against the cracked asphalt of Highway 6 as dawn broke over the Texas countryside. Blood seeped from cuts on his flanks where the arena's twisted metal had torn his hide, and his massive frame trembled with exhaustion. But he pressed forward with the relentless determination of a creature driven by love rather than instinct. Behind him, smoke still rose from the burning warehouse, but Thunder's amber eyes were fixed on the northern horizon where Lucy waited. 15 miles, that's how far he had to travel to reach the Bennett Ranch, and from there, somehow find his way to the hospital in Millbrook. For most animals, it would be an impossible journey. For Thunder, it was simply the only option that mattered. The first person to spot him was Jenny Martinez, a dairy farmer checking her morning milking schedule when she saw what looked like a small mountain moving through her pasture. Her Holstein cows scattered as Thunder approached the fence line, but instead of charging through, he stopped. His massive head turned toward the farmhouse where Jenny stood frozen on her porch, coffee mug halfway to her lips. "Holy Mary, Mother of God," she whispered, recognizing the distinctive black and reddish-brown coloring of a Brahman bull. But this wasn't just any bull. The scars on his hide and the determined set of his shoulders marked him as something special, something dangerous. Thunder studied the fence for a moment, then simply stepped over it. The 4-foot barrier that would contain most cattle was nothing to an animal of his size and determination. He landed with surprising grace on the other side and continued his northern march, leaving Jenny to fumble for her phone and dial 911. "Sheriff's office. This is Jenny Martinez out on County Road 15. There's a bull loose on my property and he's heading toward town. Big one. Biggest I've ever seen. And Sheriff? He's moving like he's got somewhere important to be." By 7 a.m., Thunder's escape had made the local radio stations, KWTX Country, announced it between Garth Brooks and George Strait. "Folks, we've got reports of a large bull moving north toward Millbrook. If you see this animal, do not approach. State Animal Control is en route." But Thunder wasn't just any escaped livestock. Margaret Sullivan, listening to her kitchen radio while preparing Lucy's breakfast, nearly dropped her plate of scrambled eggs when she heard the description. Black and reddish-brown Brahman bull, approximately 1,800 pounds, with distinctive scarring. She knew exactly which bull they were talking about. At Millbrook General Hospital, Dr. Marcus Webb was making his morning rounds when his phone buzzed with a text message that made his blood run cold. "Package escaped. Situation compromised. Advise immediate extraction." The message came from a number he'd hoped never to see again, a reminder of the darker aspects of his medical practice that had funded his research and lifestyle for the past 5 years. Webb had built his reputation on being the only pediatric cardiologist willing to work in rural Texas, taking cases other doctors considered hopeless. What most people didn't know was that he'd been systematically identifying children with rare blood types and compatible organ markers, then slowly poisoning them to create urgent transplant needs. The organs went to wealthy clients who paid premium prices for ethically sourced transplants from children who were supposedly dying anyway. Lucy Bennett had been perfect, a sick child whose death would surprise no one, whose organs could save 3 of his most valuable clients. But now, with Thunder loose and heading home, Webb realized his carefully constructed web of lies was beginning to unravel. Meanwhile, Thunder continued his relentless march through the Texas countryside. He crossed Miller's Creek at the same spot where Rebecca Bennett's car had gone into the water 2 years ago. For a moment, the massive bull paused at the water's edge, his nostrils flaring as if catching a familiar scent. But whatever memories the place triggered, he pushed them aside and waded through the shallow water, his powerful legs churning against the current. The creek crossing cost him precious time and energy, but it also put him on a direct path toward the Bennett Ranch. By 10 a.m. he was moving through familiar territory, pastures he'd grazed in, fence lines he'd walked, the landscape of his former home spreading out before him like a map written in scent and memory. Thomas Bennett was at Lucy's bedside when Margaret burst into the hospital room, her face flushed with excitement and worry. "Thomas, you need to hear this. Thunder's escaped from wherever you sold him, and he's heading home." Thomas felt his stomach drop. "That's impossible. Castellano said he was taking him to a private ranch outside Houston. Bulls don't travel 100 miles. "This one does," Margaret said, turning up the volume on the room's television where the local news was covering the story. The reporter stood on Highway 6, pointing toward distant fields where searchers combed the landscape. The bull, described as extremely large and potentially dangerous, was last seen heading north toward Millbrook. Animal control officers warn residents to stay indoors and report any sightings immediately. The animal appears to be injured but is moving with what experts describe as unusual purpose. Lucy, who had been pretending to sleep, opened her eyes. "He's coming back to me," she whispered, her voice so soft Thomas almost missed it. "Sweetheart, that's not possible. Bulls don't. Thunder's not like other bulls, Daddy." Mama knew it. I know it. And deep down, you know it too. The truth of his daughter's words hit Thomas like a physical blow. He'd always told himself that Rebecca's attachment to Thunder was sentimental nonsense, that animals were animals and nothing more. But watching Lucy's face light up for the first time since her mother's death, he began to wonder if he'd been wrong about everything. Dr. Webb chose that moment to enter the room, his usual professional smile failing to mask the tension in his shoulders. "I've been reviewing Lucy's latest tests, and I'm afraid we need to discuss accelerating her treatment timeline." Margaret's nursing instincts, honed by 40 years of experience, immediately picked up on something wrong in Webb's demeanor. "What kind of acceleration?" "There's a donor organ available in Houston. We could have Lucy in surgery by tonight if we move quickly." Thomas felt a surge of hope. "That's wonderful news." "How—" "It seems very convenient," Margaret interrupted, her sharp eyes fixed on Webb's face. "Yesterday you said her blood type was rare. Now suddenly there's a perfect match available?" Webb's smile became strained. "These situations can change rapidly. We have a very small window of opportunity." What Webb didn't say was that his Houston contacts had found Lucy's matches, two other children who were about to have accidents that would make their organs available. The accelerated timeline wasn't about saving Lucy. It was about harvesting her organs before Thunder's escape brought unwanted attention to Webb's activities. By noon, Thunder had covered nearly 10 miles, but the journey was taking its toll. The wounds from the arena had reopened, leaving a trail of blood drops on the asphalt that made him easy to track. His massive frame swayed with exhaustion, and several times he stumbled, nearly falling to his knees before forcing himself upright again. Sheriff Wade Harrison, coordinating the search from his patrol car, found himself reluctantly admiring the bull's determination. "I've been tracking animals for 30 years, he told his deputy over the radio. "Never seen anything like this. That bull's not just running, he's navigating. He knows exactly where he's going." What Harrison didn't know was that Thunder's navigation system was far more sophisticated than simple memory. The bull was following a complex trail of scents that told him everything he needed to know about Lucy's condition, the medications in her system, the stress hormones that indicated her declining health, and underneath it all, something that shouldn't have been there. A chemical signature that triggered memories of the night Rebecca Bennett died. It was the same smell that had been in the ranch house that terrible October evening, when Rebecca confronted Dr. Webb about what she'd discovered. The same cologne that masked the scent of the poison Webb had used to ensure Rebecca would never expose his organ trafficking operation. Thunder remembered that night with perfect clarity. Rebecca's voice raised in anger, Webb's calm responses that carried an undercurrent of threat, and then the sound of Rebecca's car starting in the rain. Webb had followed her, forced her off the road, and made it look like an accident. Thunder had watched from the pasture, had seen the headlights swerve toward the creek, but had been powerless to help. Now, as that same scent grew stronger with each mile toward Millbrook, Thunder understood that Lucy was in the same danger her mother had faced. Dr. Webb wasn't trying to save her. He was trying to kill her. The realization gave Thunder a second wind. His exhausted muscles found new strength, his labored breathing steadied, and his pace increased. He was no longer just a bull trying to get home to the child he loved. He was a guardian angel with horns racing against time to prevent history from repeating itself. As the sun reached its zenith over the Texas plains, Thunder crested a hill and saw the familiar outline of Millbrook's water tower in the distance. 5 miles to go. 5 miles between Lucy and the protection only he could provide. Behind him, sirens wailed as law enforcement and animal control units closed the gap. Ahead of him, Dr. Webb was preparing surgical equipment for an operation that would end Lucy's life while appearing to save it. Thunder lowered his massive head and ran faster than any 1,800-pound animal had a right to run, his hooves pounding out a rhythm that sounded like a heartbeat. Lucy's heartbeat, growing weaker with each passing moment. The race was on, and everything depended on which would arrive first. Thunder's protection or Webb's poison. Thunder's massive frame crested the final hill overlooking Millbrook at 3:17 p.m., his amber eyes immediately locking onto the white building of the General Hospital in the distance. Blood matted his black and reddish-brown coat, and his breathing came in labored gasps, but the sight of his destination gave him strength he didn't know he still possessed. 2 miles, just 2 more miles between him and Lucy. In the hospital, Dr. Marcus Webb was preparing for what he told everyone would be Lucy's salvation, but knew would be her execution. The surgical suite had been prepared, the anesthesia team briefed, and the transport team was standing by to rush Lucy's organs to Houston, where 3 wealthy clients waited. Webb's hands were steady as he reviewed the surgical plan, but his mind raced with the complications Thunder's escape had created. "The donor organ is en route from Houston," Webb announced to Thomas and Margaret, his voice carrying just the right mixture of hope and caution. "We need to prep Lucy for surgery immediately." Margaret's experienced eye caught the subtle tells she'd learned to recognize in 40 years of nursing. The forced smile, the slight tremor in Webb's hands, the way his eyes didn't quite meet theirs when he spoke. Something was wrong, but she couldn't put her finger on what. "How did an organ become available so quickly?" she asked. "Yesterday you said Lucy's blood type was rare." Webb's practiced response came automatically. "These situations can change rapidly in trauma cases. We have to move when opportunities arise." What Webb didn't mention was that the trauma case had been carefully orchestrated. A 12-year-old boy in Houston with Lucy's exact blood type and tissue markers had suffered a convenient bicycle accident that morning, an accident that would prove fatal within hours, making his organs available for harvest. Outside, Thunder had reached the outskirts of Millbrook when the first tranquilizer dart hit his massive shoulder. The dart, fired from Sheriff Harrison's rifle, contained enough sedative to drop a horse, but Thunder's size and adrenaline-fueled determination kept him moving. He stumbled, his vision blurring momentarily, but the image of Lucy's face in his mind burned away the drug's effects like fire-consuming fog. "How is that bull still standing?" Deputy Martinez asked over the radio, watching through binoculars as Thunder shook his massive head and continued toward town. "That's not just adrenaline," Harrison replied, chambering another dart. "That animal's running on something stronger than chemistry. That's love." The second dart hit Thunder's flank, and this time he felt his legs buckle. But as he struggled to stay upright, a familiar scent reached his nostrils. Lucy's scent, but wrong somehow, tainted with the same chemical signature he'd smelled the night Rebecca died. Dr. Webb's cologne mixed with something else, something that made Thunder's blood run cold. Poison. Webb was poisoning Lucy just as he'd poisoned Rebecca. The realization hit Thunder like electricity. With a roar that echoed across the plains, he found strength he shouldn't have possessed and charged toward the hospital with renewed fury. The tranquilizer darts protruding from his hide looked like the quills of some mythical beast, but they couldn't stop him now. Nothing could stop him. In Lucy's room, Webb was preparing the pre-surgical injection that would begin Lucy's final journey. The clear liquid in the syringe looked harmless enough, but it contained a carefully calibrated dose of potassium chloride that would stop Lucy's already weakened heart within minutes. To everyone watching, it would appear that her condition had suddenly deteriorated, requiring immediate surgery that would, tragically, come too late. "This injection will help stabilize her for transport to the surgical suite," Webb explained to Thomas, who sat holding his daughter's hand. Lucy, despite her weakened condition, sensed something wrong in Webb's tone. Her mother had taught her to trust her instincts, and every instinct she possessed was screaming danger. "I don't want the shot," she whispered. "It's necessary, sweetheart," Webb said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "Without it, you might not survive the surgery." Margaret stepped closer to the bed, her nursing instincts in overdrive. She'd seen enough children receive pre-surgical medication to know that Webb's injection protocol was unusual. "What exactly is in that syringe, doctor?" "Standard preoperative medication." "Nothing you wouldn't expect." But Margaret had expected transparency, had expected to see the medication drawn from labeled vials, had expected the professional courtesy of being informed about what was being administered to a child under her care. Webb's evasiveness triggered alarms that 40 years of medical experience had trained her to recognize. "I'd like to see the medication orders," she said firmly. Webb's facade cracked slightly. "Mrs. Sullivan, I appreciate your concern, but I'm the attending physician here. I don't need to justify my treatment decisions to a retired nurse." The dismissive tone was a mistake. Margaret Sullivan had been dismissed by doctors before, had fought battles for patient care that younger nurses wouldn't dare wage, and had learned that sometimes a patient's life depended on one person's willingness to ask uncomfortable questions. "Thomas," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd saved more lives than she'd lost, "don't let him give her that injection until we get a second opinion." Webb's patience evaporated. "We don't have time for second opinions. Lucy needs this medication now or she'll die." "She'll die if she gets it," Margaret shot back, her instincts now screaming with certainty she couldn't rationally explain. The confrontation was interrupted by a sound that made everyone in the room freeze, a deep, earth-shaking bellow that seemed to come from the very foundations of the hospital. Through Lucy's window, they could see chaos erupting in the parking lot as people scattered in panic. Thunder had arrived. The massive bull stood in the hospital's main entrance, his frame filling the automatic doors that hadn't been designed for livestock. Blood streaked his hide from the tranquilizer wounds, and foam flecked his nostrils, but his amber eyes held an intelligence that made even the bravest observers step back. "Jesus Christ," breathed a security guard reaching for his radio. "We need animal control. Police, everybody. There's a bull in the hospital." But Thunder wasn't randomly rampaging. He moved through the corridors with purpose, his massive hooves clicking against the polished floors as he followed a scent trail that led him unerringly toward Lucy's room. Patients and staff pressed themselves against walls as 1,800 pounds of determined bull navigated the hallways with surprising grace, his head swinging back and forth as he tracked his target. In Lucy's room, Webb heard the approaching commotion and realized his window of opportunity was closing. With desperate efficiency, he lunged toward Lucy with the syringe, but Margaret intercepted him, her surprisingly strong hands gripping his wrist. "Thomas, get that syringe away from him," she commanded. Thomas, confused by the confrontation but trusting Margaret's judgment, grabbed Webb's arm. The three adults struggled for control of the syringe as Lucy watched in growing terror. That's when Thunder's massive head appeared in the doorway. The bull's amber eyes took in the scene instantly. Lucy on the bed, Webb struggling with the syringe, the fear and confusion painted across Thomas's face. Thunder's nostrils flared as he caught the full scent of Webb's deception, the chemical signature that connected this moment to Rebecca's death 2 years ago. With a sound that was part roar, part grief, and part pure rage, Thunder charged into the room. Webb released the syringe and stumbled backward as 1,800 pounds of fury bore down on him. The bull's massive shoulder caught Webb in the chest, slamming him against the wall with enough force to crack ribs. The syringe flew from his hand, its contents spilling harmlessly across the linoleum floor. "Thunder!" Lucy cried, her voice stronger than it had been in days. The bull's rage disappeared instantly. He approached Lucy's bed with the gentleness of a mother with her newborn, his massive head lowering until his wet nose touched her small hand. Lucy's fingers found the familiar groove behind his ear, the spot where she'd always scratched him during their quiet moments in the pasture. "I knew you'd come back," she whispered. "I knew you wouldn't leave me." Thunder's response was a soft rumble that vibrated through his massive chest, not a threat, but a promise, a vow that he would never let anyone hurt the child he'd sworn to protect. Webb, gasping for breath against the wall, watched his carefully constructed plan collapse around him. The spilled contents of the syringe had left evidence of his intentions. Margaret's nursing experience had exposed his deceptions, and now Thunder stood as a living guardian between him and his intended victim. "Call the police," Margaret told Thomas, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "Dr. Webb has some explaining to do about what was really in that syringe." As sirens wailed outside and footsteps thundered through the corridors, Thunder positioned himself between Lucy's bed and the door. His amber eyes remained fixed on Webb, and the message in that gaze was unmistakable. To reach Lucy, anyone would have to go through him first. The climax had arrived, but the battle was far from over. The spilled contents of Dr. Webb's syringe spread across the hospital floor like liquid evidence of betrayal. Margaret Sullivan knelt carefully beside the puddle, her trained nurse's eye immediately recognizing what Thomas and the gathering crowd could not: the slight discoloration, the acrid smell that shouldn't exist in any legitimate pre-surgical medication. "This isn't what he said it was," Margaret announced, her voice cutting through the chaos as hospital security and paramedics crowded into Lucy's room. "This is potassium chloride. In this concentration, it would stop a child's heart in minutes." Thomas felt the world tilt beneath his feet. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Dr. Webb wasn't trying to save Lucy. He was trying to kill her." Webb, still pressed against the wall where Thunder's charge had left him, laughed bitterly. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, and his expensive shirt was torn where the bull's shoulder had caught him. "You have no idea what you're talking about, old woman. That bull is a dangerous animal that needs to be destroyed, and that girl is dying anyway." Thunder's massive head swung toward Webb at the sound of his voice, amber eyes blazing with an intelligence that made several observers step backward. The bull's nostrils flared as he processed Webb's scent, and a low rumble built in his chest. Not quite a growl, not quite a moan, but something far more ominous. "Thunder knows," Lucy whispered from her hospital bed, her small hand still resting on the bull's massive neck. "He's known all along. That's why he never liked Dr. Webb. That's why he came back." Sheriff Harrison arrived at that moment, his hand resting on his service weapon as he took in the unprecedented scene. A 2,800-pound bull standing guard over a child's hospital bed, while a respected doctor sat slumped against the wall with accusations of attempted murder hanging in the air. "Somebody want to explain to me what in the hell is going on here?" Harrison demanded. Margaret stood slowly, her arthritic knees protesting, but her voice strong with conviction. Wade, I've been a nurse for 40 years. I know poison when I see it, and I know what Dr. Webb was about to inject into this child. That bull saved Lucy's life. That's impossible, Webb protested, struggling to his feet. I'm a pediatric cardiologist. I've dedicated my life to saving children. That animal is dangerous. It escaped from an illegal fighting ring and has been terrorizing the countryside all day. Thomas felt pieces of a horrible puzzle clicking into place. You knew where Thunder came from. How did you know about the fighting ring unless he was connected to it? Margaret finished, her sharp mind assembling facts with frightening clarity. Wade, I think you need to test that spilled medication and start asking Dr. Webb some very hard questions about his patients' mortality rates. Thunder, as if sensing the shift in the room's dynamics, took a step closer to Webb. The movement was deliberate, calculated, and filled with a menace that made everyone present understand they were witnessing something beyond normal animal behavior. That bull remembers something, Margaret said quietly. Something about the night Rebecca died. Webb's face went pale. You're all losing your minds. Rebecca Bennett died in a car accident. I had nothing to do with... Thunder's roar cut him off. The sound reverberated through the hospital room like thunder itself, and several people instinctively covered their ears. But it wasn't random noise, it was communication, raw and primal, expressing grief and rage and accusation in a language older than words. Lucy sat up in her hospital bed, her movements stronger than they'd been in weeks. He was there that night, she said, her young voice carrying absolute certainty. Thunder was in the pasture when Mama died. He saw what happened. Thomas felt his legs give way. He sank into the bedside chair as the implications crashed over him like an avalanche. Rebecca wasn't investigating corruption in the county clerk's office. She was investigating Dr. Webb. Margaret nodded grimly. And she got too close to something that was worth killing for. Webb made his mistake then. Instead of maintaining his innocence, instead of demanding lawyers and due process, he let his desperation show. You can't prove anything. It's the word of a delusional old woman and a traumatized widower against a respected physician. No one will believe. What about the word of the FBI? All heads turned toward the doorway where Agent Sarah Chen stood, her badge clearly visible on her jacket. Behind her, 2 additional federal agents flanked the entrance, their presence transforming the hospital room into a crime scene. Dr. Marcus Webb, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, operating an illegal organ trafficking network, and the murder of Rebecca Bennett. Chen's voice was calm, professional, but her eyes held the satisfaction of an investigator whose long pursuit had finally reached its conclusion. Webb's facade crumbled completely. This is insane. You can't arrest me based on the ravings of a bull. We're not, Chen replied, pulling out a thick file folder. We're arresting you based on 2 years of investigation, financial records linking you to organ trafficking operations in 3 states, and testimony from victims who survived your treatments. Rebecca Bennett contacted our field office 6 months before her death. She'd been building a case against you. Thomas felt the room spinning. Rebecca was working with the FBI? She discovered that several children under Dr. Webb's care had died under suspicious circumstances, their organs harvested and sold to wealthy clients. She was gathering evidence when Webb realized what she was doing. Thunder, as if understanding that justice was finally being served, stepped aside to allow the federal agents access to Webb. But his amber eyes never left the doctor's face, and the message in that gaze was clear. Thunder had been waiting for this moment for 2 years. Webb tried one last desperate gambit. Even if what you're saying is true, you have no proof I was involved in Rebecca's death. It was a car accident. The local sheriff investigated. The local sheriff didn't know what to look for, Chen interrupted. But we do. We found the traces of brake fluid on County Road 47, exactly where your car would have been positioned to force Rebecca off the road. We found your cologne on her steering wheel. And we found the real reason you moved to this rural community, easier to select victims from families who couldn't afford to ask questions. Lucy's voice, though weak, carried across the room with devastating clarity. He smells like the man who made Mama cry that night. Thunder never forgot. Webb's last shred of composure disappeared. You're basing a murder charge on what a bull remembers. This is ridiculous. No, Margaret said, standing tall despite her age. We're basing it on what we all should have remembered. That animals don't lie, don't have hidden agendas, and don't forget when someone they love is threatened. As the FBI agents moved to handcuff Webb, Thunder made one final statement. The massive bull walked calmly to where Webb stood, lowered his enormous head until they were eye to eye, and simply stared. For 30 seconds that felt like an eternity. 1,800 pounds of gentle giant held the gaze of the man who had destroyed his family. Then Thunder turned away, walked back to Lucy's bedside, and lay down on the hospital floor beside her bed with a satisfied sigh that sounded remarkably like justice being served. "Good boy, Thunder," Lucy whispered, her hand finding that familiar spot behind his ear. "You kept your promise to Mama. You kept me safe." As Webb was led away in handcuffs and the FBI began processing the crime scene, Thomas sat in stunned silence, trying to process the revelation that his wife had died a hero and that a bull, a creature he'd sold to pay for surgery his daughter might not have even needed, had spent 2 years planning this moment of reckoning. The tragedy seemed complete, but Thunder's journey wasn't over yet. He'd saved Lucy from Webb's poison, but the damage from months of unnecessary medication had taken its toll. Lucy's real medical crisis was just beginning. As the FBI agents led Dr. Webb away in handcuffs, Agent Chen pulled Thomas aside for a conversation that would shatter everything he thought he knew about his daughter's condition. The weight of her words fell like hammer blows against his already fractured understanding of the past 2 years. "Mr. Bennett, I need you to understand something crucial about Lucy's medical history," Chen said, her voice gentle but unflinching. "Dr. Webb has been systematically poisoning your daughter for months, creating the illusion that her heart condition was deteriorating when in fact her natural progression should have been much more manageable." Thomas felt the hospital corridor tilt beneath his feet. "What are you saying?" "The medication Webb prescribed wasn't treating her condition, it was making it worse. The emergency episodes, the rapid deterioration, the urgent need for transplant surgery, all of it was artificially induced to create a timeline that served his organ trafficking operation." Margaret Sullivan, who had followed them into the hallway, absorbed this information with the grim recognition of someone who had suspected but hoped she was wrong. "The symptoms never quite matched the diagnosis," she said quietly. "I should have trusted my instincts." "But she's still sick," Thomas said, grasping for something solid in a world that kept shifting beneath him. "Her heart condition is real. She was born with it." Agent Chen nodded. "The hypoplastic left heart syndrome is genuine, but it's a condition that many children live with successfully for decades with proper treatment. Webb was deliberately exacerbating it to accelerate her decline." In Lucy's room, the 9-year-old girl was experiencing something she hadn't felt in months: actual improvement. Without Webb's poison masquerading as medicine flowing through her system, her natural resilience was beginning to reassert itself. Thunder lay beside her bed, his massive frame somehow fitting into the small space, his amber eyes fixed on her face, as if he could will her back to health through sheer devotion. "Daddy's taking a long time," Lucy whispered to Thunder, her voice stronger than it had been since Webb had increased her medication dosage 3 weeks ago. Thunder's response was a soft rumble that seemed to say, "He'll be back. We're safe now." But safety, as Thomas was learning in the hallway, came with its own complications. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, the pediatric cardiologist who had been rushed in from Austin to evaluate Lucy's true condition, delivered news that was both better and worse than anyone had expected. The good news is that Lucy's heart function is significantly better than Dr. Webb's records indicated, Dr. Rodriguez explained. However, the months of systematic poisoning have created complications we'll need to address. Her kidney function is compromised, and there's been damage to her liver from processing the toxins Webb was administering. Thomas felt Margaret's steadying hand on his shoulder. But she'll recover? With proper treatment and time, yes. But it will be a long process and expensive. The detoxification alone will require weeks of specialized care. The financial reality hit Thomas like a physical blow. The $25,000 from selling Thunder was already committed to medical bills that had been unnecessary. The ranch was still facing foreclosure. And now Lucy needed legitimate medical care that would cost far more than the fraudulent treatment had. "I don't have insurance that will cover this level of care," Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And the ranch. I used Thunder's sale money for bills that shouldn't have existed." Agent Chen exchanged a look with Dr. Rodriguez before speaking. "Mr. Bennett, Dr. Webb's victims are entitled to compensation through the Federal Victims Fund. Moreover, his medical malpractice insurance will cover Lucy's treatment costs. The FBI is also working with the state to ensure that families like yours receive the support you need." "But what about Thunder?" Thomas asked, the full weight of his betrayal settling on his shoulders. "I sold him to pay for treatment that was killing her. How do I live with that?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Margaret Sullivan, drawing on 7 decades of wisdom and a lifetime of watching people navigate impossible choices, placed her weathered hand on Thomas's arm. "You live with it by accepting that you made the best decision you could with the information you had. You sold Thunder to save Lucy. Thunder escaped to save Lucy. Both of you put her life above everything else. That's not betrayal. That's love." Back in Lucy's room, Thunder was demonstrating his own form of love. The massive bull had somehow sensed that Lucy's improvement was real but fragile. He had positioned himself so that his warm bulk acted as a living barrier between her bed and the door, ensuring that no one could approach without his knowledge. Hospital staff had given up trying to move him. It was easier to work around 1,800 pounds of protective devotion than to argue with it. Lucy's improvement became more apparent with each passing hour. The bluish tinge left her lips. Her breathing eased, and most remarkably, she began to show interest in food for the first time in weeks. But with clarity came questions that broke Thomas's heart. "Daddy, if Dr. Webb was making me sicker, does that mean Mama died for nothing?" The question hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. Thomas struggled for an answer that would honor Rebecca's sacrifice while helping Lucy understand the incomprehensible complexity of what they'd endured. "No, sweetheart," he said finally. "Mama died because she was trying to save other children like you. Dr. Webb was hurting lots of kids, and she was trying to stop him. Her death wasn't for nothing. It was the beginning of justice." Margaret nodded approvingly. "Your mama was a hero, Lucy. She knew she was in danger, but she kept investigating because she couldn't let Dr. Webb hurt more children. That's what heroes do. They put other people's safety above their own." Thunder, as if understanding the conversation, lifted his massive head and looked directly at Thomas. In those amber eyes, Thomas saw something that stunned him: forgiveness. The bull that had every right to hate him for the betrayal of selling him to a fighting ring was offering absolution. "He's not angry with me," Thomas said, wonder in his voice. "He never was," Lucy replied with the simple wisdom of childhood. "Thunder understands that sometimes people make mistakes when they're scared. He knows you love me." The emotional revelation was interrupted by Dr. Rodriguez returning with test results that confirmed what they all hoped but hadn't dared believe. Lucy's responding remarkably well to the medication reversal protocol. Her heart function is stabilizing and the kidney damage appears to be reversible with time. "How much time?" Thomas asked. "Months, not years. And she'll be able to go home much sooner than we initially thought, probably within the week." The news should have been purely joyful, but it raised a practical problem that Margaret was the first to voice. "What about Thunder? The hospital can't discharge Lucy with a bull as her companion animal." The question sparked a discussion that involved hospital administrators, animal control officers, and eventually the mayor of Millbrook himself. The unprecedented situation of a bull who had literally saved a child's life by exposing a murder conspiracy had captured national attention. News crews were gathering outside the hospital, and social media was buzzing with #ThunderTheHero hashtags. The solution came from an unexpected source. Agent Chen, who had been coordinating with various government agencies, returned with news that seemed too good to be true. The Department of Agriculture has agreed to grant Thunder special status as a therapy animal, given the unique circumstances and documented therapeutic benefit to Lucy's recovery. He'll need to undergo some basic training and health certifications, but legally he can remain with Lucy during her recovery. Thomas felt tears he hadn't shed since Rebecca's funeral begin to flow. The bull he'd betrayed in desperation was being officially recognized as his daughter's protector. "There's more," Agent Chen continued. "The story has attracted some significant attention. A children's advocacy foundation wants to establish the Rebecca Bennett Memorial Fund to help families dealing with medical corruption. They're offering to cover all of Lucy's treatment costs and provide ongoing support." As the sun set over Millbrook, Thunder remained at Lucy's bedside, his massive presence a testament to the power of love to overcome betrayal, distance, and even death itself. The worst was over, but the real healing, for all of them, was just beginning. 6 months later, the Bennett Ranch looked like a place where healing had taken root and flourished. The foreclosure notices that had once decorated the kitchen table like harbingers of doom had been replaced by thank-you letters from families across the country whose children had been saved because of Rebecca's investigation and Thunder's heroic journey. The Rebecca Bennett Memorial Fund had not only covered Lucy's medical expenses, but had also provided the resources to transform the ranch into something Rebecca would have been proud of. A sanctuary where children recovering from medical trauma could find peace alongside gentle giants like Thunder. Lucy sat in her wheelchair on the front porch, but not because her heart condition confined her there. Dr. Rodriguez had cleared her for most normal activities, and the wheelchair had become more of a mobile command center from which she directed the daily operations of what the local newspaper had dubbed Thunder's Haven. Her color was rosy, her energy boundless, and her laughter, so long absent from the Bennett household, now rang across the pastures like music. "Thunder, you're supposed to be helping with the therapy session, not eating the children's snacks," Lucy called out to where the massive bull was delicately accepting animal crackers from a group of young patients who had driven from Houston for their weekly visit. Thunder's response was a dignified snort that seemed to say, "Quality control is an important part of therapy," before he gently nuzzled a shy 6-year-old who had been silent since arriving at the ranch 3 hours earlier. Thomas watched from the barn where he was preparing feed for the 3 additional rescue bulls they'd brought to the ranch. Gentle giants like Thunder, who had been saved from fighting rings and had shown aptitude for therapy work. The transformation in his own life still amazed him. 6 months ago, he'd been a broken widower selling his daughter's protector to pay for treatment that was slowly killing her. Now he was the director of a nationally recognized therapy ranch, with a waiting list of families seeking the healing that only seemed possible in Thunder's presence. Margaret Sullivan, now officially the ranch's head nurse and Thomas's closest advisor, emerged from the house carrying a fresh pitcher of lemonade and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who had lived long enough to see justice triumph over corruption. "Channel 7 called again," she announced. "They want to do a follow-up story on Thunder's therapy work for their anniversary special on Dr. Webb's conviction." Thomas felt the familiar mixture of satisfaction and sadness that came with mentions of Webb's trial. The disgraced doctor had been sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and his conviction had led to the exposure of an organ trafficking network that had claimed dozens of children's lives across 5 states. Justice had been served, but it couldn't bring back Rebecca or undo the trauma that so many families had endured. "What did you tell them?" Thomas asked. "I told them Thunder doesn't do interviews without his agent," Margaret replied with a grin. "But seriously, they want to focus on the healing work, not just the criminal case. I think Rebecca would have liked that." Lucy's voice carried across the yard as she read from a letter that had arrived that morning. "Dear Thunder and Lucy, my name is Sophie, and I'm 8 years old. My mommy says you have a magic bull who helps sick kids feel better. I have to have surgery next month and I'm scared. Can Thunder tell me it's going to be okay? Love, Sophie." Thunder's massive head turned toward Lucy at the sound of his name, and his amber eyes seemed to understand the weight of the little girl's request. Without prompting, he walked over to Lucy's wheelchair and gently placed his enormous head in her lap, a gesture that had become his signature move during therapy sessions. "Tell Sophie that Thunder says brave girls who write letters to bulls are the strongest kind of girls in the world," Thomas called out, his voice thick with emotion. The afternoon brought visitors that still amazed Thomas. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez arrived with 2 medical students who were researching the therapeutic benefits of large animal therapy, followed by Agent Chen, who had become something like family since the investigation concluded. "Any news on the appeals?" Thomas asked Chen as they walked toward the pasture where Thunder was demonstrating his latest skill, allowing children to braid ribbons in his tail. "Webb's lawyer filed the paperwork, but it's purely procedural," Chen replied. "The evidence is overwhelming, and honestly, the man confessed to everything once he realized Thunder wasn't going to let him near another child." Lucy, who had developed an uncanny ability to hear adult conversations from remarkable distances, looked up from where she was supervising the ribbon braiding operation. "Thunder's the best judge of character in Texas," she announced. "Better than any lie detector." As the sun began to set over the Texas hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded Thomas of Rebecca's favorite time of day, the ranch settled into its evening routine. The visiting children headed home with promises to return next week. The therapy bulls grazed peacefully in the pasture, and Thunder took his customary position on the front porch where he could see both Lucy's bedroom window and the long driveway that led to the main road. Thomas found himself standing beside Thunder as the last car disappeared down the county road, both of them guardians in their own way of the miracle that had grown from tragedy. "You know something, Thunder?" Thomas said quietly. "I think Rebecca would be proud of what we've built here. Not just the ranch, but this family we've become." Thunder's response was the soft rumble that had become his way of saying, "I know. I can feel her here too." Lucy's voice drifted from the house where Margaret was helping her prepare for bed. "Daddy, Thunder, come inside." It's story time, and tonight I want to tell you about the brave bull who saved a little girl and taught everyone that love is stronger than fear. As they walked toward the warm light spilling from the farmhouse windows, Thomas realized that some stories don't end. They just transform into new beginnings. Thunder had taught him that heroes come in all sizes, that love transcends species, and that sometimes the most important journeys begin with a single act of faith. The Bennett family, man, child, and bull, was finally truly home. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't between people. They're between hearts that recognize each other across species, across pain, across impossible odds. Thunder's journey reminds us that in a world where trust feels broken and institutions fail us, the purest loyalty often comes from the most unexpected places. For those of us who've raised families, buried loved ones, and watched children grow into their own lives, we understand that protecting those we love isn't always about being strong. Sometimes it's about having the courage to trust again after betrayal. Thomas learned what many of us discover in our later years, that family isn't defined by blood or even species, but by who shows up when everything falls apart. Thunder showed up. He kept showing up. In our golden years, when we worry about being forgotten or becoming irrelevant, this story reminds us that love, real, stubborn, protective love, never expires. It just finds new ways to manifest, new lives to touch, new purposes to serve. The Rebecca Bennett Memorial Fund continues to help families today because one bull refused to let evil win. That's the kind of legacy we all hope to leave. Love that outlasts our physical presence and continues to heal the world long after we're gone. What animal in your life has shown you unconditional love when people let you down? Have you ever had to make an impossible choice to protect someone you loved, even when others didn't understand? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear how love has shown up unexpectedly in your life.